During his 16 years on the run, James Whitey Bulger's aura had grown to mythical status, a larger-than-life gangster beyond the reach of the law. But it was a bitter old man who appeared in federal court this summer when Whitey Bulger was finally held accountable for his crimes, or at least many of them, and sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. What we learned and didn't learn, and that trial is the subject of a new book, Whitey on Trial: Secrets, Corruption, and the Search for Truth. And with me now is the co-author. Margaret McLean is an attorney and former prosecutor who closely followed the trial and provided legal analysis for WGBH News. Yes, you did. You were there every single day and on the radio every single day. So what were you after in this? I mean, it's not just a recap of the trial. What were you trying to bring forward, do you think, that didn't make news at the time?
I was trying to bring forth the inside scoop on the trial for everyone involved. So, yes, we heard there were no cameras in the courtroom, as you remember.
Don't remind us.
Yeah, I know. And I really wanted to get close to the victims' relatives, to everybody involved in this story, this saga. So I got close with, state police, other law enforcement, FBI, obviously Whitey himself right after the verdict, and Hank Brennan, defense attorneys, prosecutors. So I wanted so people will get the trial testimony and then the behind the scenes to really show you what was going on, what was the thinking.
Did you think, Margaret, that Whitey called the trial a sham. I mean, he could have testified. Do you think that we really missed out? I mean, his attorney was very, very defensive, Jay Carney, very defensive about why he didn't put him on the stand, but did we all miss out on that or not?
Well, I think we did miss out. We all wanted to know what Whitey had to say. We all wanted to know, is the Department of Justice still covering things up at higher levels, which I think they are. The reason he didn't testify, I believe, is because he was afraid the press would report it in their own way and twist his words. That's what he says. So,
speaking of words, you actually had some correspondence with Whitey Bulger and John Connolly, the disgraced FBI agent, but you write in the book that you didn't even know whether you should open this because you had gotten close to the victim's family and you thought it was sort of almost a sacrilege to hear what he had to say, but of course you did. And here it is that we saw another letter from him a couple months ago, that beautiful, Catholic school handwriting there.
Yeah.
What does he say?
Well, he's basically saying that his trial was a sham trial. He goes back to the 1960s and talks about the Barboza case, who was the first top echelon informant, and the Lamoni trial. And, of course, us taxpayers, we paid out $100 million for that case of the wrongful convictions. He's trying to point out that the corruption, the cover-ups by the Department of Justice and the FBI went from the 1960s to his era. And, of course, if you follow it a little bit more, it went to 2011 with Mark Rossetti. So, and my question of what I really want readers to get out of this, and what I got out of this eventually, talking to people, is why is this truth, why are documents still being covered up today? Shouldn't we know about this? Hasn't it gone by? I mean, it seems like a long time ago. Why do they want to suppress the truth?
Well, there's other things the federal government hasn't spoken up about either, as we well know, the Todeshev case, for one. He also talks about being in solitary confinement. This is when he was in Plymouth. He's since been moved, but solitary 23 hours a day, sometimes 24. Sometimes he goes days without getting out. He talks about Catherine Gregg.
Yes. He talks a lot about Catherine Gregg here because obviously he was in love with Catherine Gregg. That's part of a love story here. He thinks it was unjust that she got 8 years for harboring a fugitive. When I spoke to one of the FBI agents in the back of the courtroom doing my interviews and behind the scenes, he said to me, that's the longest that he has ever seen anybody getting for harboring a fugitive. Usually it's 1 year, 2 years, or maybe none at all. But to get 8 years in federal prison is significant.
Yeah, but it was more than just harboring a fugitive. I mean, let's face it.
Sure.
It was hiding money and guns, and so it was well beyond that.
Right. Victims' relatives would agree with you on that.
Now, John Connolly, what did he say to you?
Oh, John Connolly, that was very interesting. I had the exclusive interview from him from prison about the trial. I wanted to know why he wasn't called to testify by either side, the prosecution or the defense. So he said, and first of all, I didn't know if he'd testify, and he said, I would have absolutely testified as to the truth of the Department of Justice corruption that went to the higher levels all the way to Washington, D.C. And I looked into that. I talked with some of the people on the Congressional Committee from 2004, where they wrote the the report, Everything Secret Degenerates, and I noticed that there were documents from 1979, the race fix case, that are still being covered up today. So Connolly was right in saying, you know, he was convicted, obviously 40 years. He convicted here in Boston and down in Florida. But what he has to say is important because maybe other people should be held accountable. The Justice Department should be held accountable. And after writing this book, I keep thinking to myself, are there other Whitey Bulgers out there? And who's going to be, where are the checks and balances? Who's going to be watching the Department of Justice when Congress says change things and they don't, because obviously they had the Mark Rossetti problem after this? Where does that leave us as citizens? So that's what bothers me here.
Right, Margaret McLean. Not too passionate at all. All right, thanks for joining us.